All right. Oh my goodness. Can you all believe it is another Thursday? Welcome back. And thank you so much for tuning in to Brown Girls Sound of BGSO, where we center and amplify the voices of women of color. I can't help but to smile because since our last episode, we got another doctor amongst us, and I am too excited, too thrilled to reintroduce my sister, Dr. Edwina Jones. Listen, y'all know we can't start an episode without celebrating excellence, okay? Absolutely. So happy for you,
Absolutely.
sis.
Yes, congratulations.
Thank you.
Yes. And so it's so very fitting that this month, the entire month of May, we are focusing on mental health. Mental health always matters, right? But you know how this goes. When we celebrate specific months, especially around awareness, that is when we more intentionally pause to focus on, to bring about awareness around, to tune into mental health matters. And for our podcast, what we're doing is we're talking all about mental health, especially from the perspectives of women of color. And so we invite you always into this conversation and hope that you get a lot out of it, right? So let us know in the comments if anything that we shared today really resonates with you. So last week we started out talking about mental health, and it's so interesting because I mentioned on our last episode, right, that we started out talking about identity, then we moved into relationships, right? And now we're talking about mental health, but in so many ways, all three of those topics are so related. It's not even funny, right? All three of those, like we can't talk about mental health as for Black women without talking about it from our perspectives, right? So that's where identity comes in. But we also can't talk about mental health without taking a look at the ways that various relationships in our lives actually impact our mental health and are impacted by our state of our mental health. So I know that if you have attended any one of my previous workshops or webinars or things like that, you probably see me share an infographic with you. I'm not going to share it today, but I'll tell you a little bit about it. So I know that the three of you have seen this, but it's been a minute. So there's this graphic, right? And it's called The Problem Woman of Color in the Workplace. And so like what this does, I'm actually looking at it right now, but what it does, I see Alina, she's like, yeah, I remember that. And so it shows this really systematic type of movement of a woman of color in the workplace, right? So I'll go ahead, just in case you don't know what I'm talking about, or you need a refresher, I'll describe it. So according to this graphic, right, a woman of color enters an organization. And typically there's white leadership. And so there are these phases. The first phase is the honeymoon phase. And that's when the woman of color feels welcomed, right, and needed and happy. Oh, so we're so glad you're in this position of leadership. We're so glad you're with us. Yay. Happy hours are hosted and receptions and all kinds of stuff, right? You get little thank you notes and welcome notes on your desk. But then there starts to be like this this in-between phase before you get to the next phase, but where the woman of color often feels like, well, am I here just because of the color of my skin, right? Starts to kind of get up in your head. Am I the tokenized hire? Am I hired because I'm Black, or is it because I'm competent, right? Even though we know we're competent. But then the next phase after a honeymoon is reality. So when reality sets in, that's typically when the woman of color starts to point out issues within an organization. I know for me, I can speak from my perspective, that has happened with me, working in schools where I'm looking at, hey, how are these practices disproportionately impacting certain students? How are these practices disproportionately pushing out women of color, Black women, or keeping us out of positions of leadership, right? So reality starts to set in. And, the woman of color is starting to point out certain things. And that's when, again, in between this phase and the next one, she'll start to notice repeated injury and microaggressions and lots of things. This is where the trauma typically starts. So, because you're not a threat until you start pointing out things, right? And so then it starts to move into another phase, which is the denial that is even happening. So this is the response typically within the workplace, not in our organization. You see, we have an equity statement, and look at the diverse hires. We brought in some brown folks, and how could that be? Look at our values. This is what we say we value. But then a lot of times you'll also see at this point, people of color, specifically women of color, pitted against each other. So it becomes the squeaky wheels versus the silent Susans. I'm just calling, I don't know where it came from, but the silent Susans, right? So the folks who are ringing the alarm, those are the problem ones versus the ones who are like, oh no, we're fine. They have to give me my 3 meals a day and my paycheck every 2 weeks, and all is well. But anyway, that's when the targets and the attacks tend to ramp up. And then retaliation starts to happen. Maybe that is, the organization is starting to say that the woman of color is part of the problem. You're the reason we're having it. You didn't have these problems before you came here pointing them out, right? No one else said these things. But anyway, then a lot of times the woman of color exits the organization, right? So I just kind of went through what this graphic looks like, and it's very systematic. And the reason why I wanted to bring that up is because, I've been hearing a lot from women all over the place, but particularly in our BGSO group. I don't know if you all have noticed, like when things are put up, about our experiences, particularly in the workplace, a lot of us, I saw a post just a couple of days ago where a member was talking about something that was going on over email, right? And so anyway, what I'm finding is that a lot of us are having these adverse experiences in the workplace. And I want us to kind of talk about, maybe if we want to talk about our own experiences, trends that we're seeing, in ways that we think that these experiences actually shape our mental health or our mental wellness. And so what does that look like? I'll just quickly share for me, because I see you all's wheels are turning. I'll quickly share that when I was in an experience where I started questioning myself because of the things that I was going through, it impacted the way that I saw myself as a competent leader, right? So there were so many days in which I thought, well, maybe I'm not really cut out for this, right? And so then I became anxious around doing things that I love to do, like speaking, right? Like leading folks and like helping folks and supporting folks. And so I just wanted to know from you all's perspectives, starting with Nafisa. So how have you seen this show up, like the workplace impact mental health, particularly for women of color?
Well, I'm thinking you covered a whole lot. My wheels were just grinding the whole time you were talking. But one of the main things I think about is just perception, because I feel like that's a lot of pressure. And it's like, you don't want to come across, like you said, you don't want to be the angry Black woman. But you also don't want to have to feel like you have to walk on eggshells. And I feel like a lot of times we do that because we're concerned of being perceived that way, or perceived as the one who is, going against the grain, or not being the team player. If you're speaking out and you're pointing out things that, are of concern to you, where you maybe feel like things aren't being done equitably, or you may feel like, your voice is not being centered or valued. And I think that just that suffering and silence again, and if you're constantly kind of like pushing it towards the back and what's the word I'm looking for?
Like suppressing it, maybe?
Suppressing it, yes. And suppressing it, it eventually starts to become just corrosive, and it eats at you because you're not truly able to be like your authentic self. And I think that's huge for women of color, whether it just be even how we show up physically. When we talked about that in our identity piece, we were talking about like your hair, the clothing you're wearing, like, it's like, can you truly be your authentic? I'm sorry, I'm still at work, as you can see, be your true authentic self. And show up that way at work. And I feel like that's like a constant thing that we kind of battle with women of color. Like, can I be myself? Can I wear my braids? Can I wear, my nose ring? Can I wear my, African garb if you want to? Can I go ahead and speak up at this meeting and say, wait a minute, well, how come there wasn't anybody of color to present at this meeting? You know, without having to look like somebody who's just trying to start a problem. But if it's like a constant issue and it's like, do I speak up again about it? Am I going to be perceived the wrong way? So I think just having to always have that like that figurative like cloud over your head constantly at work, it really it just impacts you negatively.
You know, absolutely, and in various negative ways, right? And there have been lots of studies that have looked at the impact of racism. And when you start talking about the intersectionality of racism and sexism, right? So being Black and woman, like the impact of that on our bodies. So we can talk about like how we, you know, and yes, it's absolutely important, but how, you know, sometimes I know I used to suffer from migraines when I was in a really toxic, corrosive work environment. And then I started having heart palpitations. Like they're showing that these types of experiences are actually killing us. Like they're silently killing us. Chantal, you know, what do you think? What do you have to add in terms of ways in which our workplace experiences impact our mental health?
Well, my experience for me was when I had my first son and I was working full time. And I remember the treatment as an African-American woman in the workplace being pregnant. And I worked for a state agency at this time. And I just remember always being singled out. I couldn't quite figure out why I was being singled out, you know, but it always felt like things were directly pointed towards me, or I was always involved in something that I had no knowledge of. And I started to really question myself as a woman, you know, in my position. And also I was pregnant at the time. So of course I was under a lot of stress, you know, anyway. And I just remember not getting the support that I really needed when it was time for me to sort of go out on maternity leave. And that, my experience for me really opened my eyes and made me really think about being a mom and working in the industry at the same time. And just feeling like, you know, I didn't get that support that I really needed. And that sort of led down my path to entrepreneurship. But for me, that experience really messed with me mentally and emotionally, because I saw my white counterparts get more support, you know, than I did. And so thank you. I'm so glad we're having this conversation because it really made me reflect back many years ago on that experience. And now that I'm like, oh, well, now I know I was being treated, you know, a different way. I know I was being singled out. You know, I know I was getting more pressure put on me to perform, even though I was in a very delicate state. And so I'm glad that we're having this conversation and we're calling it out because it's very real, you know? And so, yeah, absolutely. I noticed the difference.
Girl, I had a whole chill that just kind of went through my body just now, because as you were speaking, it made me think of just so many. I mean, there are so many layers to this conversation that we can't even peel back in this podcast episode. Because when I heard you sharing, especially around your pregnancy, you know, it made me think of how it goes back to that double-edged sword thing, right? Like even when it comes to I don't want to call it a medical condition, but even when it comes to medical situations, right? You know, experiences that we're having, right? Pregnancy being one of them. You know, Black women are often seen, oh, you can take it. You can work to your due date and you can carry these boxes and you can, you know, whatever. Whereas, you know, honestly, in a lot of places, a lot of Black women would say, well, I've seen white women be treated very differently.
Very.
Right? When they're pregnant, very differently. That's when you see the special nursing rooms come up, and you know, you see you hear about the special breaks and the alleviation of certain duties and things. Yeah, look, I see Alina's face going, yes, right? So but I want to bring that up, and yes, they deserve that. They deserve that, right? They absolutely deserve that. And so, but what this conversation is saying is that so do we. so do we. And when we're not in situations where people are, helping us to feel like we are deserving of those things, then how does that start to impact us up here? Right? It starts to perpetuate this idea a lot of times that, oh, well, yeah, I guess I do have to be strong. I'm different. As a Black woman, I gotta keep, I'm gonna help you move this desk over, even though I'm 9 months, and let it bump into my belly, put me at risk. There's so many ways in which then we're not cared for. And then we also a lot of times tend to internalize that and not properly care for ourselves. Right? And what are you thinking?
I was thinking of the public school system and thinking of being a teacher, a woman in the public school system. Well, I mean, we all know, teachers and those who have been in a position where it comes with a lot. And there's, like you said, so many layers to it. So I was trying to figure out, which one of the layers do I even want to talk about? And so the word burnout, automatically came out for me. And one of the things that we do, I don't know what it is, it's like we taking sick days is something that we try, it's like we don't do enough of. And we just continue to work, we continue to work until it's like, when you find yourself in a place where you have no choice but to take a sick day. It's like you're forced to take a sick day. And I don't know what it is. I don't know if it's because I feel like part of the public school system, and I've been out of it and I came back in it, and haven't been out of it. And it's like now I'm in it, but I was like, I'm looking and I'm seeing it in a different way. And I see how I was able to work myself to the place where I was burned out, to where I was like, I got to get out of this system because it's just so problematic for various reasons. I can't even touch on one single reason, but it just feels like it puts you in a wheel and you can't find your way off this wheel. There's a lot of dictatorship that goes on as a teacher in the public school system, where it's like we fall into these routines. It's hard for us to break out of it. And so that plays a huge part in our mental health when it's like people are coming at us and they're, telling us all these things that we have to do. And it's hard for us to kind of break out and be creative and be our own persons in the class. I know what my students need. And I want to give my students what I feel like they need, but they're having a lot of pushbacks coming from either school leaders or the district leaders or whatsoever. And so you find yourself in a very uncomfortable setting, and it just seems like a lot of fighting that's going on. And so that does play a part in the mental part of it. So that's just one thing that I just wanted to touch on, and I'm just speaking from a current perspective, and I've, of course, been in other situations, other school settings where other mental health issues arise. So I was just putting it out there for the public school part of it.
Yeah, and you brought up so many great things. And I think that you brought up a lot of things that a lot of us can relate to, whether you are an educator, whether you're an educator in a public school. And I think that there's a common thread because I'm thinking about something you shared earlier around this skepticism around taking time that we've earned, right? Hold on, let me say this, Barry. We accumulate or accrue leave to use it. Sis, use it. Use it. One more time. Use it. Please, I'm begging you. There's no reason we should be leaving leave on the table. And it's not about abusing it, but it absolutely is about you. It's part of your benefits package. It's part of being a salaried worker is that you get leave to use when you need to rest, when you're feeling ill. It doesn't mean you have to have pneumonia or be on a life support. You can have a headache because you are just stressed out and need to take the day. So take the day. Take the day. I can't say that enough because I remember being like that. There was so much guilt around it, especially for some of us. Let me be real, especially for people of color, especially for women of color, because you see a lot of us in the school system, right? Yes, we are still underrepresented in terms of teacher numbers across the country, and believe it or not, even here in Baltimore City with predominantly Black students, we're still grossly underrepresented. But when you see us brown folks represented, you're likely to see a lot of Black women, right? And so even then, we are just, there's so much that we're shouldering, and yet we are walking around like, I'm gonna walk till the wheels fall off, but what I'm not going to do is take a day off. And then we got to check ourselves. We have to check ourselves on that one and figure out, where's that coming from? And then we've got to undo that. And then we have to do what we need to do for ourselves. And for many of us who are also caretakers outside of our professions, whatever your profession is, right? For your family, right? How can we pour our, all of ourselves into a job that will replace us when we drop dead? I lie to you not. I've seen two supervisors of mine they were both women, by the way, carried out of the places of employment on stretchers. I'm just saying. And I knew I didn't want that to be me. So Chantel, thank you for sharing that. When you found yourself in a situation where you were feeling undervalued, right? That you were like, let me create my own lane. That's the same thing I did, right? So if that's something you're thinking about, then just step out on faith. So I want to talk a little bit about mental health and about relationships. So I know that the graphic that I described in terms of like the exit, right? In terms of there being this honeymoon phase, and then the woman's kind of speaking up about things she doesn't like, right? And then what breaks loose. And then there's this exit. And then again, if you've attended any of my workshops, you'll know that I speak about this exit as sometimes not being a physical one, right? And most times, from my own experience and from women in my circle, exactly. Most times it happens up here first, right? Before that physical exit even happens. So even if we're talking about the workplace, most times before you even quit or you sign that letter of resignation, you've already been like, FDS. I'm not gonna say what that's saying for, but anyway, you've already been saying that for a minute, right? So let's kind of think about what that might have to do with relationships and ways that we see like some tie in to that particular situation. So in terms of relationships, how do you all feel in your experiences that they, can impact? And by the way, here's a whole disclaimer. We are social beings and we are meant to be in relationship and in community with each other. And I wholeheartedly promote and stand by healthy relationships. So this is not a relationship bashing session, but what I do want to take the time to talk about is, what is the impact of relationships on mental health? And we are only speaking from our perspective, clearly. So what are you all thinking? I'm just opening it up to anybody.
When it works, it works. It works. And when it's not working, it just doesn't work. And you brought up the whole mentally checking out, especially when I feel like when women have voiced their concerns, they have voiced their needs and their wants, and there's like no change in a relationship. It is easy to be like, you know what, that's it. And so it's like we mentally check out before we exit. And I know I speak from the I perspective that is me in all relationships, like even like with the job and everything. It starts here. It's like the battle starts in my mind. And when I've made up my mind that this is no longer something that suits me, there's like really no coming back from it. So it's like, then it's just kind of going through the motion of it all, until that day. What I'm really doing is planning my exit strategy for real. Yeah.
Listen, because you don't catch me slipping. You are absolutely right. What are you going to say, Chantel?
To piggyback off of, sometimes we will mentally check out, but then I think on the flip side, we have to know how to mentally check in with ourselves too, and know what our baseline is. What makes you feel good, right? You should know I'll say that you should know what happy feels like for you, what peace feels like for you, what joy feels like for you, even sadness. So I don't want to just be on the positive extreme, but you should pretty much know how you feel in between those two spectrums. And you should know when you're in a healthy relationship and what a healthy relationship looks like. And I'm not just talking romantic, I'm talking friendships and girlfriends and whoever, and family. You should know what the healthy relationship looks like between two people. And if you don't, you might want to take some time and step back and have that season of time and reflection for yourself to figure out what that looks like and feels like for you. And I think sometimes mentally, especially within the Black and African American culture, we're so used to that toxicity. It's almost like we wear it as a badge of armor. And I'm so glad we're having this conversation to say, no, we are going after healthy relationships. We are championing healthy relationships, and we're undoing this toxicity because we don't have to embrace that. Our mental health matters. Our healthy relationships are important. And so, yeah, we really have to get back to discovering what that baseline looks like for us.
I love that. I love that. And I love that you made the point that I hope, our viewers are getting. So, let us know what you're thinking about this conversation. If you're watching us right now, please type it in the comments on YouTube or in the BGSO group. We'd love to know what you think about this conversation, because what Chantel brought up was so poignant, in that we're talking about mental health, and right now we're relating it to relationships of all types. And so I love that you brought up knowing what your baseline or what it looks like to feel whole and to feel well, because that way you can use that to measure your experiences against. Like, I know what it feels like to be loved. I know what it feels like to be appreciated. I know what it feels like to be respected, and this ain't it, right? And then I go ahead and, as Edwina said, I can go ahead and plan my exit, right? Nafisa, what were you going to say?
I was going to basically almost say what you just said, but just piggybacking off of what Chantel said, and just listening and like trusting ourselves. Like, when something does not feel right, whether it's a romantic relationship, whether it's platonic, whether it's, in the workplace, when you are really not feeling like you are being fulfilled, like you're being appreciated, like you're being loved, or you feel like you're not getting what you need out of whatever that relationship is, that's when you need to leave. And you need to, not hold on to things that are no longer serving you. Because I feel like sometimes we want to believe in the potential. And Edwina has said that before, and we're like, oh, well, it could be this or it could be that. But no, it is what it is. And I think sometimes we wait too long. We wait too long, and we drag ourselves along. And, that till we just are completely depleted in different relationships. And I think if we exit a little bit sooner and listen to those red flags, I think it would really, be beneficial and save us from a lot of heartache and stress and
trauma.
Yes.
Right? Trauma. I think it's something, thank you so much, sis, for saying that and reminding us, of those things that we've already talked about, because I think that especially in our community, we have romanticized this rah-da-da chick.
Yes.
Listen, I think we've just taken it too far. Right? I'll just be honest. I think we have romanticized like struggle, especially in relation. Yeah, he had. I'm actually honestly, I can't even I can't even have that conversation on like a sarcastic level. Like, it almost came out, and then I was like, that's not what I'm doing. So anyway, but y'all know what I'm talking about. Like, we have actually romanticized and fantasized, like riding and dying through anything. You know what I mean? I think about in Lauryn Hill's song, the end, where she's like, why won't you live for me? Right? People like, I'll do this to death, I'd rather die. And when she talked about, why won't you live for me? Give to me. Why won't you live for me?
That's my jam.
Yeah, that's my song.
And I think about that, and I think that not enough of us talk about that, right? We don't talk about like living, obviously, yes, for ourselves, but in relationships living for each other. Like a situation should be serving you by giving you life, right?
Yes,
I know that we
yes.
say that and it sounds, oh, like, yeah, you're giving me life. No, I want something and someone is actually giving me life. Like, give me life. It should be a growth environment. That relationship should feel like fertile soil. I mean, your petals should just be reaching toward the sky, period. And it doesn't mean that there's never going to be rain, right? So flowers need what? Rain and sunshine to bloom.
Absolutely.
At the end of the day, what I'm saying is that we've got to start to look at relationships and evaluate, as Chantel said, number one, is this serving me in the way that I expected to, demanded to, and deserve it to? And if not, then we got to start making some moves, because otherwise you'll find yourself in that cycle of abuse. And again, I mean that very broadly. I found myself in an abusive workplace environment. It was downright abusive, right? And so for any of you who have seen the cycle of abuse, which if you haven't, let me know, I can share it in the chat, but it is actually like this cycle, this web, and you can get caught up in it. And as Edwina said, it can feel like you're on a whole wheel, like a hamster wheel, you don't know that can stop if you start running in it, because you don't even know you're just kind of going. Child, I tell you, I know all too well. So let's start to, as we wrap this one up, I want to move on to just some final thoughts, because, you know, we've talked about a lot, we've shared a lot, but what I want to know is, no matter whether we're talking in the workplace, in our communities, or in our various types of relationships, how is it that we support one another? So I just want to know, what is one way that we can actually show up for one another? Because yes, I get it. You know, we're talking about like, sis, get out, make a move. I recognize, I know that it's not that easy. And especially when there are, you know, other factors involved, right? It's not always easy to just up and leave your job when you're like, but I have a mortgage and kids. Not always easy to leave a marriage or other type of relationship. So I get that, and I want to acknowledge that. So in the meantime, between time and in the aftermath, how is it that we support each other? So just really quickly wrapping it up, Nafisa, I want to go to you first. How do we support each other?
I think just providing like a safe space and allowing each other to be vulnerable. And as you know, I always say, just letting each other know it's okay to not be okay. You don't have to have it all figured out at that moment, one day at a time.
Thank you. How about you, Edwina?
I would say listening, you know, just be that listening ear. Sometimes it's not about providing answers and giving advice. Sometimes somebody just want to talk and vent. And I think just being that listening ear is very helpful.
Thank you so much for that. What about you, Chantel?
I would simply say, like, you know, sis, you are not by yourself. You are not alone in this situation. And I am here to support you in any way that I can.
Yes, yes. And I would just round it off by saying, you know, in terms of the type of support we can offer each other, it would be a judgment-free zone, right? You never know what folks are really going through. We know what they tell us, but we don't know all the tears that they shed and all the thoughts that they've had and all that they've endured. And so just letting folks know that you're not there to judge them, but to just support them in a non-evaluative way, I think can be really powerful and a really great way to show love and support. So thank you so very much for tuning into our conversation. We invite you to join us every 1st through 4th Thursdays of the month. Remember, we have 2 more episodes in the month of May where we'll be talking about mental health. If there is something that you really like for us to focus on, let us know. Let us know in the comments. And if we've shared something that really resonated with you, please say yes, sis, yes, Tony, yes, Edwina, yes, Chantal, yes, Nafisa. Let us know, or even if you need to push back against something, we love to hear all types of feedback. So with that being said, we hope that you all are taking great care of yourselves and finding time to feel well and feel whole. We will see you next week with a very, very special guest. All right, see y'all. Bye.